Hi there, welcome to the archives. So I wanted to Kpop Demon Hunter. Hi, how's it going? It is September 8th, 2025. We are approaching the fall solstice. Summer's almost over. I thought I would get on here, and this is Ayera. She's just messing up my plans as they do. I feel like my hairline is like so receding. Okay, so I watched Kpop Demon Hunters on Netflix, and I thought it was deep. So according to the internet, it's a 2025 animated film by Chris Applehans and Maggie Kang. It is produced by Sony Pictures Animation and released by Netflix. It was directed by Maggie Kang and Chris Applehans, with a screenplay they co-wrote with the writing team of Danya Jimenez and Hannah McMahon, based on a story conceived by Kang. So K-pop Demon Hunters, I thought it was really deep. I'm always interested in how shame shows up in pop culture, and shame was mentioned a couple times in the movie, and so I just wanted to share my thoughts on that. Sorry, I got distracted. Okay, so the first time I heard shame mentioned, again, it was playing in the background, so I wasn't entirely paying attention the whole time, but I was really interested in feelings and the idea of feelings coming up, right? And one of the things around the 40-minute mark, one of the characters was talking to a demon. She was like, demons don't feel. And I thought that was really interesting. I wanted to pick up on, because yeah, I often say this, and I've heard others say this, right? Especially around about narcissists, like, oh, narcissists don't feel. I often say that certain people are like dead inside. They lack emotions. They what else do we say? They lack empathy. They can't feel. They're like robotic. They're zombies. They can't feel. They're dead inside, right? That tends to be a thing. We tend to think that people who are like cold-hearted, cold-blooded, just ruthless, don't really feel. And in response to that, the demon was like, no, that's all we feel. That's all we do is to feel. And I love that they touched on that, because that tends to be true, right? That tends to be true. From what I've seen folks say in the literature, as well as on following folks like Dr. Ramani, for instance, who does work around narcissism, or other psychotherapists or therapists online, is sometimes the people we think don't feel actually tend to be the ones that feel the most, but they don't know how to feel, right? And so they become so overwhelmed. With feeling. Sorry, one second. I knocked this over. And I want to fix that, because it's bothering me. Sorry. They do tend to feel, right? Sometimes, if anything, they feel too much. Myself, for instance, right? We often do say that about like Aquarius. Oh, Aquarius they easily detached. They don't feel. And while all of that can be true, we're also water bearers, so we actually feel a lot, right? We can feel just like Cancers or Pisces, but the thing is, we know how to build walls, right? We know how to put up our guards in order to not feel. And I think sometimes that's what happens, right? People who feel too much don't know how to regulate those feelings, can't name those emotions, are afraid of those emotions, see it in others, are disgusted by the emotions, right? Sometimes we're disgusted by other people because we're disgusted by our own emotions. And so I really appreciated them bringing that up, right? Demons, or folks who we consider demonic, actually do feel, right? That's all demons do is feel. I've heard people say the same thing about narcissism, for instance, that narcissism is rooted in a deep, deep shame. Just today I shared an episode, one of my first episodes that I ever put out publicly was I Ego You, and that talked about my narcissistic traits, right? And in that, a lot of it was deep, deep, deep shame, right? Again, I studied shame. For those who don't know, I have a PhD in feminist and gender studies, and what my research looked at was the way in which shame gets in between our interpersonal relationships, right? I was really interested in how emotions in general separate and divide us. And the reason why I wanted to do that is I would see in so many different group settings where I was in leadership positions, right? I would lead teams or so on and so forth. And I would see that the dynamics would be great. We would be in an amazing location doing incredible work. And then all of a sudden somebody would say something and it would trigger somebody's trauma. Somebody would say something. It wouldn't be all that problematic, but it would bring up emotions. And we would get annoyed and then anger and frustration. And then all of a sudden I would just be sitting there watching the team dynamics erode, right? We were doing amazing work, and now all of a sudden all these emotions started to show up, and I wanted to understand what that was about, right? I wanted to understand what that was about within the feminist movement. How are emotions getting in our way? How are emotions keeping us from the work that we need to be doing, right? Rather than focusing on the systems and the structures that be, now we're fighting against each other. There's jealousy, there's envy, there's bitterness, there's resentment. All of these things, I'm human, so I also engage in, right? But that's kind of what I wanted to understand when I went into my PhD. So that's what I looked at in my PhD research, was how first I looked at three things: fear, shame, and trauma. It was way too big. It was way too big, especially because I was doing autoethnography. And that meant looking at myself. That meant studying myself and myself in relation to other people, right? Fear was a huge one. And so trauma was another big one. And so it was all too big. And I ended up focusing on shame because I saw that shame, out of all of those are destructive, but the ways in which shame is so dense, the ways in which shame is so, and they touch on this in the show, right? Shame is like, I am not good enough. I am not good enough. Not I've done something that's bad. I am bad. I am wrong. I am not enough. And I think a lot of us feel like we're not enough, right? Shame shows up a lot in our movements. But because shame is something you're supposed to be ashamed of, we don't talk about it. I don't have shame. I'm not ashamed at all. Why would I be ashamed, right? So we're even ashamed to name shame. Anger might be easier. Sadness, it might be easier. Grief, it might be easier. Yeah, I'm grieving. I'm angry. But shame, it was like nobody I knew was going through shame other than Brene Brown. And so that's what I wanted to talk about. Another point that they made, again, the next point was shame is not good enough, right? And that's what the demons would tell them in their head. You're not good enough. That's fear, right? Fear, you're not good enough. You're not good enough. You left your family behind. You're not good enough. That is a huge thing. And capitalism exploits that, right? Capitalism 100% exploits that. Because what do you do when you don't think you're enough? You're going to hoard. You're going to consume things to make yourself feel like you're not enough. You're better, right? You don't feel like, I don't know, your physical ugliness has been coming up. The conversation around ugliness has been coming up a lot this week, right? So you think you're ugly, or people are telling you you're ugly. Well, that's perfect for capitalism, because now you're going to do everything you can to make sure you're not ugly, right? You might, and again, not to shame anybody who's had surgery, not to say that people who get surgeries and do things are necessarily ashamed of themselves, right? That's not necessarily it. People might just want to feel better about themselves. But I do want to underscore that capitalism loves us being insecure. It loves shame. It feeds off of our shame, right? Oh my God, I'm not enough. Now I got to go buy this clothing, right? How many people do shopping as retail therapy? Again, not to shame retail therapy, right? Because just because you're buying clothes and I'm buying a joint doesn't mean one is better than the other. So this is not about shaming people. It's just about naming that capitalism is very, very, very much indebted to all of us being in shame, right? You're going to want to buy that bigger car so you can keep up with the Joneses. You're going to want to get that surgery. You're going to want to go to school, go back to school because you don't feel like you know enough. You're going to want to do all of these things to make yourself feel like it's enough. What else? And then again later they talked about how the grima used that's how emotions was how they used to control people, right? I love that they brought that up. Yes, because emotions are used to control a lot of us. Outrage, anger, shame in specifically is used to control people, right? Let's go back to body shaming. If you're the idea of shaming somebody for being fat, for instance, if I shame you enough for being fat, the hopes is you'll be so ashamed of yourself. You will think you're so not enough that you're gonna work out. You're gonna go to the gym. You're gonna get a gym membership. Right? It's really about control. It's really about manipulation. It's really about getting other people to do what it is that we want them to do. That's not always a bad thing. That's not always a bad thing. Again, I posted another old episode today of talking about the useful elements of shame. Shame could be really productive. Shame could be very useful. If somebody's doing something, look at the world right now. We need more shame. Please shame people more, right? But directed to the right people, the billionaires, the politicians who are making trash-ass decisions for all of us, right? The ICE agents. Shame is productive because it gets people to shame, right? So I'm not saying don't shame or that shame is bad. However, just recognize that shame is used to control people. So in shaming billionaires, for instance, understand that you're shaming them as a form of manipulation, right? As a form of to control them, to get them to change. Again, it might be a positive aspect of shame, but it's still used to control, right? We still weaponize shame and other emotions to get people to do what it is that we want them to do, right? What else? I think that's pretty much it. And then the whole idea of I can help you be good enough. Again, that's capitalism, right? I can help you to be enough. Finally, if you get this surgery, you're enough. Finally, if you get this house, you're enough. Finally, if you do this thing, XYZ, you will be enough. And then you get XYZ and you still don't feel like enough because it was not about external. Shame is in here. Not feeling enough is it's an internal thing, right? It's an inside job. We can hoard as much and do all of that. Yes, it feels good, right? Yes, getting your hair done absolutely boosts your confidence. Again, I'm not shaming that, right? But I just wanted us to be mindful. So that's what I just wanted to talk about some of those things that they brought up. Feel our shame, feel our misery. Often a lot of us don't want to feel our shame. We don't want to feel our misery, so we avoid it. Usually that just leads to us externalizing it and projecting it onto other people, right? Ayira, not you. Okay, that's fine. I love that they touched on this. I touched upon I can help you be good enough. That too, exactly, capitalism. That's capitalism's voice. You're not enough. I already talked about this. I've been haunted with the memory of failing. I wanted to talk about that too. I was thinking about that. Made me think about Christina Sharp's work. Is it Christina Sharp that talks about haunting, and someone else talks about haunting, phantom. But it reminded me of Christina Sharp's work. What was Christina Sharp's book again? Awake? Christina Sharp. In the Wake. Yeah, it reminded me of Dr. Christina Sharp's work, book, In the Wake, on blackness and being. So the haunting, right? This idea that this thing is haunting you. There's not enough. This failure, right? Again, that's tied in with fear and trauma. Again, now I'm just going on and on, but that's all I wanted to talk about. They talked about hope as well too. The funny thing with hope is that nobody else gets to decide except for us. That's all emotions, right? That's all emotions, really. No one can really decide what emotions we feel other than us, but because we're taught that emotions are something that overwhelms us, is done to us, is in us, it feels as though we can't escape it, that we can't control our emotions, right? Especially when we don't even know how to name it. That's not necessarily true. Sarah Ahmed's work talks a lot about this, right? Sarah Ahmed talks about emotions as something outside of us. It's not always something that's in us or of us per se. the idea that shame grows, yes, right? They talked about that too. 56 minutes in, how shame grows, right? And hiding shame, it grows. Brene Brown talks about this as well too. And exposing shame and talking about shame, it helps you to release the shame, right? The more you're able to talk about things that you're ashamed of, the less it holds you prisoner. And so that's all. We can't, the song, I love the song that says we can't fix it if we never face it. Again, that too, right? If we're constantly avoiding things and we're just like, oh no, I can't look at it, I can't face this. Well, all it is like it's growing around us and becomes like a cave that overwhelms us, but because we're not addressing it. So again, this is 15 minutes. I'm gonna go because I want to keep this short, but that's all I wanted to share is I really like Kpop Demon Hunters. I thought it was really deep in terms of teaching us about different emotions and how they work to kind of keep us stuck, and how they separate and divide us, right? That's essentially what my PhD was. All of these different emotions, now we can't get along, now we're pointing fingers, now blame is a huge indicator of shame, right? Myself included. So yeah, looking forward to more on how shame shows up in pop culture. I also watched, there's a few things I watched where I might come back later and talk about where emotions is showing up in pop culture. I was recently talking with a cousin about how emotions show up in the Bible, and I really love some of her feedback and her thoughts about some of the different Bible stories where emotions show up. So maybe she's inspired me to consider more talking about where and how emotions are speaking to us and teaching it, where the Bible teaches us about emotions. So I might talk about that more in the future. But where else are you seeing shame show up in pop culture? What have you learned about shame and other emotions recently? Right now is eclipse season apparently. I know I'm struggling with like negotiating a lot of different emotions. I'm taking a social media break when I can, just because I find myself to be really trigger happy, right? And so a lot of us are feeling big feelings right now, which is not a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing, but I think it could be bad when we start to put things on other people that have nothing to do with them and it has to do all with ourselves. So hopefully this full moon was not too rough for you. And yeah, have you watched Kpop Demon Hunters? What are your thoughts? I thought it was really deep, so that's all I wanted to share, okay? Until next time, in solidarity.